Hi, I'm Leila.
And I'm Beth,
And we are Both And.
a podcast dedicated to giving a voice to the multiracial experience in America by discussing relevant topics in a safe space.
Hello, listeners. Hello, friends. Today we are talking about how the national rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion is reshaping opportunities, support systems, and social climates for all marginalized communities in America, including our beloved multiracial population. And I just want to say, my mom always tells me, Leila, stop yelling. And I'm not yelling, I am passionate. And this is a topic I'm
Yes.
very passionate about. So forgive me in advance.
No apologies necessary. But yeah, I think a lot of reporting frames debates on DEI in terms of Black versus white or white versus insert other monoracial identity here. These policy shifts have consequences for multiracial individuals who often straddle like multiple social, racial, cultural identities.
Yes. And I think that's the thing. I mean, when it comes to multiracial people, we are usually a mix of something other than the majority monoracial culture in America, which is currently called white. So for me, DI has a special place in my heart because in 2021, I did a 7-week program with the University of South Florida Muma College of Business to get to get a DEI workplace certification. And that really taught me the ways that organizations can create diverse workplaces, address equity issues, and foster inclusivity. I think a lot of people think about representation, like making sure visually we have people of a lot of different backgrounds, but there's so much more to that. Like once those people are in a space, how to make them feel like they belong, not just feel like they belong, but create a space where they actually belong. So that program really opened my eyes to the reality that DEI work isn't just like a checkbox of like, we have this many Blacks and this many Natives and this many Asians. And it's not just gender of like, we have women and men and everybody in between. It's a lot more than that. And there's actual things like programs we can put in place to support these spaces that we create for our people.
Yeah. I mean, it's really like DEI is a commitment to break down the systemic barriers that our country has, whether consciously or unconsciously, put in place, adopted, and maintained, creating equal opportunities and building environments, like you said, where people feel seen, valued, and respected regardless of their background or identifiers and such.
Mm-hmm. And I think DEI gets a lot of hate in the media, but this is just like a real example of DEI, at least in my workplace. So I'm part of a global team at an agency where I work, and I have a Muslim coworker. I have multiple Muslim coworkers. So it helps me to know when Ramadan comes around so I can set meeting times that like work for everyone, because the start of my work day is usually the end of my coworker's work day. And if they've been fasting all day, I don't want to put them in that situation of you have to stay on for another 30 minutes to talk about SEO when really I could wake up earlier and we could have a meeting so they can go home and break their fast. So I feel like at its base level, if you like boil it all the way down, DI is just consideration. It's being considerate of other people. And I want to say who wouldn't want to do that, but we know there's a lot of people who wouldn't want to do that.
Sadly, yes. But I think because of that selfish nature of humans, that's why these programs exist, to help fight back that like darker side of humanity, to bring more of the good in our behaviors and our policies and our workplaces, etc.
And I think some of it too is it's not always like malicious behavior. Sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah.
Though I will say, if there's a reason you haven't heard of like a challenge or seen it, that's usually intentional. But one of my best friends in Atlanta actually just recently broke her foot. And it makes DEI like even more real, because now all of a sudden my bestie who can no longer drive, she went from able-bodied to like temporarily disabled in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And now life for her is completely different. She has more challenges. Like when we're thinking about going out to eat, like, is there a ramp for her to get into the restaurant? Is there enough space for her to walk with crutches? Like, And that's a whole nother side of it, able-bodied,
Yeah.
disabled, or whatever the proper terminology is there. Forgive me, disabled community, if there's new terms. But even that, we
Yeah,
want to respect people, how they identify themselves. And I mean, why not? Why not?
exactly. Like I remember one time I was working for a university that during grad school, and I was working, my office was in our library building, and I was walking back from lunch and I saw a student who was in a motorized wheelchair just like sitting, and it was like a warm day, just like sitting in the sun at the bottom of the ramp. And I was like, they're not on their phone, they're not doing anything, like they're just sitting there like staring at the building. And I looked, and of course, because it was like a university, so it was like brick everything. And apparently some of the bricks had been like decaying and whatnot. And so there was like some brick worker who was like digging up the broken bricks and relaying them, and they broke for lunch, but left the work site just taped off, and they were working right in front of the wheelchair ramp.
Oh
So
my
the
goodness.
student literally had no way of entering the library to study for their classes.
Hmm.
And like I was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And they're like, "Hey, like I have a meeting in there soon. Like I need to study. I need to get books for an upcoming exam and I can't access the building." And I was like, "Okay, like let me run to my office. Let me call facility services. Like I'm so sorry." And I stopped and I realized we only have one ramp into the entire library for the whole
Dang.
campus. And so it
Wow.
wasn't even like, "Oh, hey, or come to this side." Or, like the only other ramp was the loading ramp in the back for like deliveries, which isn't safe. And so I called facility services and they were like appalled and apologized profusely and like went to put at least plywood over it so that the student could get into the library safely. But things like that where I'm like, it doesn't take that much out of your day to put some plywood down and cover your work site and you go take your lunch. But this like messed up this one person's entire day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we think of those, what we would call accommodations, like we can build those in. Society is what we have created it to be. We can build those into society. Like we can make society. I think we're past the point of asking for equality. It's like we need equity. And I mean, we design how big doors are. We design where ramps go. Like we decide which holidays show up on our calendars, you know? So all of this stuff, it's all made up, but it's not made up. Like it has been made up by somebody and we can continue to make it up. So we have a society that tells everyone they belong. And I think the
Right.
majority of people who don't want that are the ones who believe that they're going to lose some power by allowing other people to be seen and heard and respected.
Hmm.
But if your power comes off of like the oppression of other people, maybe we should reconsider that. Maybe we should look
Right.
again.
Yeah. And so unfortunately, like a lot of rollbacks have been happening at the start of this year.
And rollbacks really diminish like institutional tools and trainings that can help counteract like discrimination or unconscious bias. There is a lot of people in my network, like my LinkedIn network, that started doing DEI trainings, but then also like created their own businesses for things
Hmm.
such as this to either track discrimination, to show, to like shine a light on where it was in nonprofits and organizations. And if you're rolling back DEI, we're really losing those tools.
Yeah.
And the way it has been rolled back in society, I think has instilled a lot of fear in people.
Yeah.
So I don't like the way these rollbacks have been. I feel like they erase the visibility that we were just starting to have in America, and that's really unfortunate.
And I know a lot of critics try to use some reverse psychology and say that DEI is racist because it uses like racial profiling and whatnot. And I found this quote by Ken Frazier, who was the former CEO of Merck, and I feel like he described it best. He says, at its best, DEI is about developing talent, measuring it in a fair way, and finding hidden talent and disadvantaged talent in a world where not everyone has an equal chance to exhibit their abilities. So by rolling back DEI policies and initiatives, that means rolling back opportunities, support systems, social climates for all marginalized communities, and specifically for us, like the growing multiracial population.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It also reminds me of this quote from, I think I might be misquoting. It was Eddie S. Glad Jr. and somebody was comparing they're like the Einsteins of the world and these great leaders, and it's like, well, how many minds were lost, in the plantation fields of America? Like how much
Hmm.
talent, how much genius, they did not have the opportunity. Injustice was done to these people. And in a way, I feel like DEI, because injustices are still happening. So, like, to bring it to present day, not all the way back in slavery times, which wasn't that long ago, but
True.
to bring it to the forefront of like today's conversation, who are we missing out on because
Yeah.
these initiatives and rollbacks are happening? What corporations won't find that great talent because they're not making an effort to look in maybe untraditional places or to support organizations that would help elevate those people? So I do feel like there's a lot that we can do individually for DEI, but there is a corporate component today. And that's why we
Yes.
wanted to bring in a guest to talk to us about it. Who do we have?
Yes. So joining us today is Will, a respected labor and employment attorney whose work sits at the heart of where policy meets people. Will has advised public and private employers on everything from discrimination claims and personal policy to high-profile negotiations involving DEI challenges.
And most famously, Will is Beth's baby daddy. So, and not just baby daddy, they've been in a long-term relationship for like 1,000 years. They're married. But Will brings a nuanced legal lens to our conversation today. We're going to talk about what's really happening with DEI in corporate America.
You there? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Will, welcome back to the podcast.
You there? Long time no see.
Longtime listeners, true fans of both and will recognize Will because we'll recognize his voice at least because he has been on our podcast before.
So before we get started and jumping into all the DEI stuff, I want to clarify because you are a corporate attorney and you famously represent corporations and not individual employees, yes?
Yeah, for the most part, there are a few small exceptions, but by and large, the law firm that I work at, mid-sized law firm, regional influence, focuses mainly on corporations.
Okay, and so the legal work that you do in the employment field for these corporations is threefold, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the folks that work in marketing at my firm would prefer that I say it this way. And we strive to be full service, right? And we try to take care of our clients in every aspect. But generally, I do a lot of counseling work. I advise on a lot of corporate structures, policies, things like that, contract provisions. We do a lot of drafting and transactional work. And then because people are messy, and things inevitably will go wrong, I also do the litigation work. So I go to court on behalf of these corporations as well.
So, in everything happening with DEI, what has been your experience before all the rollbacks and writing DEI policies into companies' handbooks, procedures? I'm sorry, Leila, did you want to do something first?
I just want to say, listeners, this is a free podcast. This is not free legal advice. So anything Will says, you cannot take it to the bank. You cannot take it to the court. We're just having a fun chat. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that disclaimer. You're right. This is not legal advice. It's also not the opinions of my law firm for those that may or may not know the firm that I work for. And so, yeah, general legal insights rather than legal opinions or advice.
So Beth, your question.
So, in terms of the consulting and policy writing you do before all of the DEI rollbacks, what was your experience writing DEI policies for companies?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's hard to pinpoint the timeline, right? Because obviously the rollbacks are recent, but there was a time not too long ago, right? It was actually a good thing. Like it was like a hip and trendy thing. There were incentives, right? I think specifically during the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We saw a lot of companies that were striving to implement policies that were geared towards increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think there was a lot of social pressure to do so. And so a lot of my clients were coming to me and asking what it looked like mechanically, how to implement these policies, but also whether or not it was worth it. And it became one of the favorite parts of my job, to be honest with you, that I got to sit down with, CEOs and CFOs and explain to them that there was true value to pursuing and preserving opportunities for people of color, for marginalized communities and people groups. And I will say, kind of just as a technical thought, there were kind of two categories of companies that were seeking to implement these policies. On one hand, there were the private companies that were just seeking to diversify their workforce, right? For whatever reason. On the other hand, they were companies that were received governmental funds, either federal or state governmental funds. And so a lot of times those companies don't have a lot of say in the policies they want to implement because
Mm,
it's tied to the money they receive from the government. At
sure.
that time, though, pre Trump, pre executive order, there actually were incentives for certain kinds of DEI programs, right? For a lot of federal contractors, if you're a minority owned or a female owned federal contractor, you can get certain benefits and tax write offs. And so there were a lot of programs incentivizing that kind of behavior. And so those kinds of policy initiatives. And so my job was oftentimes sitting down with these CEOs, walking through the pros and cons of it, how to do so, and then drafting up these policies and oftentimes training, right, their workforce, training their management on how to actually walk it out, how to value, how to incorporate others from different walks of life. And it was pretty successful. Like I have to admit, not saying that I was the source of that success, right? I was getting lots of testimonials from clients saying, we were we were hesitant to go down this road. We didn't know what it really meant, but we're seeing people thrive and succeed in ways that we didn't anticipate. One example in particular that sticks out to me was a company that established a recruitment pipeline with HBCUs that
Nice.
previously didn't have that kind of population. And, they started the pipeline and they were thoroughly surprised by the work ethic of some of these students. And a lot of them were non-traditional students, first time college graduates or first in their family to go to college and graduate. And when given opportunities, they were not just meeting the expectations, they were exceeding these expectations, which
Mm,
was contrary to the narrative out there that, diversity hires, oh, you're not actually qualified. I think a lot of my clients saw that that wasn't the case. There's always horror stories out there about, bad instances where you hire someone and they don't work out. But I don't think that was ever because of someone's background or because of their ethnic makeup, right? Just not every scenario works out. But regardless, we were seeing good success. And I think there were good incentives in place. I think it was a mutually beneficial pursuit. Good for the company, good for the people. And I was excited to take a role in that and help enforce it and encourage that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would say even that, like the third piece of that, good for me, the consumer. I know probably the type of companies you worked for, it wasn't always like a B2C type of situation. But when I would see companies announcing their DEI initiatives or even coming up with ways of like, this is how we will find this talent, this is the money we're putting into these communities. It's like,
Hmm.
we could have been doing this the whole time. Like,
Yeah.
okay, like I'm just excited now that we are doing it. And, that makes me feel good about shopping at a certain place or like supporting, being like a vocal supporter of a certain type of company. And to lose that, I feel like has been rough. So with oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. You make a great point in terms of like the virtue consumer, like the consumer that cares about the virtues of the places where they shop or they serve, you know. And even if some of the companies, I have a few companies that are smaller, mid-sized businesses that actually do serve customers, but even the customers the companies that serve other companies, right? Like that is if their customer is another company, they're sending a signal by virtue of the programs and the people that they hire.
Hmm.
I don't know the data right on what happened or what's happening currently now that companies are rolling back policies. If that's affecting consumers, I know the big stories are the stuff like the Target boycott and things like that. But I would be interested to see the data of what it looks like in terms of were there more people shopping at certain stores that had DEI programs versus now that they've lost them. And I'm sure we'll see that data soon. I'm sure it's in the process.
Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure.
So that being said, since the rollback of these DEI initiatives, how have you noticed your clients' response in terms of like policy or even like their general attitude in meetings or phone calls?
I'll start with the attitude, right? I think people are nervous. I was going to say scared. I think I'll walk that back slightly and just say they're nervous. On one hand, there are some companies that invested in these programs. Like they didn't just put pen to paper and say this is what we believe, right? They didn't just add in a diversity statement to their employee handbook. They actually invested money in some of these programs to go and change the way their workforce looks. And so I think they're nervous about what's going to happen to that investment. They're frustrated by the fact that they're being forced to either walk back or deviate from their plan against their will in some regards. I think, and to be frank, like it's not there's not a lot of clarity, right? Like obviously the media says a lot about kind of the war on DEI, but there's no clear guide in terms of what companies have to do to avoid losing their federal funding. Or if they're a private company, right, they don't want to run afoul of any agencies or get on anybody's watch list for that matter. And so everyone's trying to figure it out. And I think a lot of the general sentiment has been nervous or scared or frustrated, just even from a logistics standpoint, because they have to kind of turn a ship around and go the opposite direction.
Which is unfortunate because I'm already nervous, scared when I go into work, and now I have to be more scared that some big watchdog organization is like watching me. And we even had, I won't say the client's name, but in my line of work, we had a client where a list was floated around of these are the words we think like an AI bot is on our website, like trying to find these words specifically. And if you have that word, then there's like a target on you and you'll lose federal
Mm,
funding. And some of the words, like it was some of them were obvious, African American, like Hispanic, things like that. But then there was also like women was on there. And it's
just
like
that's
just the word,
so
just women.
broad.
Yes. And it's like, what does that mean? But because of the lack of clarity of what actually is happening, like
Yeah.
this specific client, like had to take down a large portion of their website, scrub it, put it back up. And
Whoa.
now we're putting up less quality work or
Yeah.
incomplete work because they need the money. They need the money. They need the federal
Yeah.
funding. So it's
Well, and
So
unfortunate to
that's
see that.
the percentage of which a lot of these companies rely on funding is huge, right? So, and that's you can have the most well-intentioned company that has every desire to maintain these policies, but when they realize that, we're talking 40, 50, 60% of their yearly budget that comes from governmental funds is at risk, they don't feel like they have a whole lot of options, right? And so, logistically, you're right, Leela. I don't think there's anybody sitting in a dark room somewhere in DC, searching through everybody's websites for any hint of DEI. It's some algorithm. It's some bot that is designed to pick up on certain words. One of the approaches we've tried to take is that we want to be able to find. I shouldn't say generally. Some of my clients have asked me, look, we want to maintain these policies. How do we adjust them so that we don't get in trouble? Right? We want to maintain the spirit of the policies, the intentions behind the policies, but like help us change the structure, help us change how they're worded so that we don't get in trouble. And for those people that are willing to fight the good fight, I really appreciate. And I've worked really hard with them to help them find ways to navigate that world. Others have just said it's too risky, right? And they've just walked it back altogether. And that's everybody's risk assessment is different in that regard. That's why one of the reasons why they call me, right, to kind of weigh through the pros and the cons. And I do my best to try and offer decent advice on how to do it if they want to do it, or if they're adamant that they just have to walk it back, go through the motions with them on that as well.
now you represent clients, I mean, insider wife knowledge. You represent clients of different sized companies. So of those companies who are doing a risk assessment, do they tend to be on the bigger, like multi-million dollar side, or do they tend to be on the smaller side where the risk assessment is more like a trolley problem for them?
No, that's a really good question. I think I've always thought about it in terms of money, right, rather than size of company, so to speak, right? Because usually, at least the first wave of people that we've been getting calls from are the ones that have federal funding or government funding of some sort, right? So then
Hmm.
it's the risk assessment's based off of what percentage of your yearly budget is based off of governmental
So
resources.
that's, and that isn't dependent on size. It also, that's more
Yeah,
dependent on like business or field or whatnot.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. But it does sound like what you're saying is that it's a lot more of a trolley problem. It's like, okay, I want to care for these initiatives, but I also want to pay the employees that are currently employed. And if we lose funding, then like diversity initiatives aside, we're going to have major layoffs if like 60 to 40% of our budget is cut or lost.
Yeah, and the trolley problem is an interesting way to describe it because I've some of the clients I've gotten very close with, right, over the years of working with them, I can see their heart. And
Mm,
especially if that company has a larger mission that serves the community, then you're really looking at a trolley problem, right? Do
Yeah.
we walk back a policy that'll hurt our employees or protect our employees, lose funding and not be able to help the community anymore, right? Not be able to help
Yeah.
certain people groups anymore if that's what they do. And I think that's a really hard decision. Most companies will ultimately choose their mission over their employees in that regard or the policies. For what it's worth probably worth clarifying. None of these initiatives or executive orders have required anybody to be fired, right? So it's not like people are necessarily losing their jobs if they're already in the door. The problem is like, what will the quality of life be like in those jobs without these programs that protect them? Or as someone that's been the only, black face in a lot of rooms, right? Like you get a lot of hope that you're going to recruit and bring in other people of color. Well, now without these policies, there's no incentive to do so, right? So then you start to
Right.
feel like, well, I guess I'm always going to be the only black face in certain. So I think it's worth acknowledging that no one's necessarily losing their jobs, but I do think that the quality of life in that job could change going.
I will say too, though, nobody's lost their jobs yet,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
just I do have a family member that works in government, and they got a little flyer that was like, if you know of anybody doing any DEI programs on the DL, report it to this number. And it was like, what the heck? Like, there's a government organization giving these flyers out. So luckily, nobody in that
You're
office
right.
yet has been.
With that thought as well, the only other branch I'll add on to that, I'm thinking of a client recently that got a letter that was like, hey, we know that you have DEI programs. Be careful. Like you need to shape up or else you're going to lose your funding. Then there was an attachment to that letter from ICE as well, because they knew that the company also hired a lot of
Okay.
international employees, right? And so I do think on some level, maybe I should walk back my earlier statement. People could lose their jobs to the extent that if multiple agencies, like, and all these agencies share information, right? So if the
Right.
agency that gives you money is sharing that information with ICE, and ICE comes in and starts asking questions about where people are from, it could spiral out of control. I haven't seen that happen yet. So that's why I made the comment earlier that I don't see people losing their jobs. But you're right; it could happen theoretically.
I do want to clarify. The only people in the research I've done that are losing their jobs are people who are like chief diversity officers or people who are explicitly like the chairman of the DEI board or whatever. And it's, again, not necessarily that these executive orders are saying you must fire these people, but it's companies' responses of not wanting to lose the federal funding.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? That like technically, if the policy that created the reason for somebody's job is no longer there, then what's going to happen to that person? In
Right.
my general experience, though, companies are willing to find another place for that person, right? Like usually,
Sure.
I guess there are niche examples where somebody really was only hired for the purpose of running a DEI program, and they have no other skill set outside of that, and they can't find another place for the person, or the person doesn't want to stay, right? Like if
Yeah.
somebody's passion is running DEI programs, asking them to then switch over to accounting may not really go over so well, but yeah. Maybe I did make a overly generalistic statement. There are scenarios where people would lose their jobs. It's just not the executive orders or the initiatives that are requiring
Mm-hmm.
those job losses.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Or maybe we'll look back on this podcast and we'll all have a laugh, and it was nothing bad happened anymore after this. But probably
Yeah.
not.
I mean, we're still so early in this. I mean, this stuff started in January. It's only been, what, 6 months since a lot of these executive orders have been signed, that
I
we
mean,
don't really know the true ripple effects yet.
I will say, and I'm generally a pretty pragmatic person. I consider myself a realist, right? I used to be a very optimistic person, and then the world kind of beat that out of me. So I'm a realist, right? I still have a lot of hope. I think the flip side, if I were to make the other side of the argument, there were a lot of there was a lot of performative activism going on, right? There were a lot of companies that didn't really care about DEI, but it looked good when you posted it on social media, or it got them a tax write-off or whatever. Now, I will say, I will take performative activism over no activism, or performative inclusivity over no inclusivity. But I do think that people are showing their true colors now in some regards. And I've
Yeah.
been pleasantly surprised by how many people, when placed in a situation where they've had to show their true colors, actually wanted to keep the programs. Like they really did want to fight and find ways to preserve these diverse communities they've been building in their workforce. And if that means restructuring things, painting it a different color, right? Like doing what you got to do to make sure that you're not showing up on some watch list. Some people have been really willing to invest in that and to do that work. And I think personally, it's because they've seen that a more diverse workplace is a better. Like they've seen over the course of a couple of years that there was actually merit to these pursuits, and they don't want to lose that value.
Yeah, and that's just, I feel like we also have the data to prove that, like the value of a diverse workplace, the economic impact of it. Like the studies have been done, and the data shows it's better to have that diversity in all respects, not just race, like in all respects.
So I guess, Will, to summarize it, you kind of get the behind the scenes look from the policy writing, like company employer side of things. What would your response be to the critics against DEI initiatives?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I'm always curious to figure out what they think it is and why they're so critical. I think this is a unique area of dialogue where people seem to, yeah, they seem to be like everyone's fighting over the like a victim mindset in some regard. Like the people that are very anti DEI have taken a position that they are victims in some capacity. And I think when you probe or you push past that initial understanding, you more often than not find out that people don't know what they're talking about, right? Like they don't actually understand what
Sure.
DEI is or what it does or the value of it. But I think that for the critics out there, I I'm always inclined to start with questions. I always want to be, curious, not judgmental, right? So I do try to push and get an understanding of where they're coming from because I would want that same grace provided to me. But at the end of the day, I would say that they need to come to a place of understanding about one, the world around them, right? Like it is woefully misguided and short-sighted to assume that you can continue to build these echo chambers, these rooms that look just like you, and that you're going to be able to make it far in this life in this world, right? I think regardless of what's happened politically in terms of who's in the White House, there are certain things you cannot put back in the bottle. Like you cannot put the genie back in the bottle in that regard. And then two, I'd encourage people. I would really push people to actually look at the results, like look at the data, look at how the benefit that's truly there, and to weigh that against whatever they think they're losing. And I've had some really, people that I would not expect to take positions they have, right? Some very old white men who have come around and said, I was really worried because the way the media talks about this stuff, I thought it was me bad. But now I'm seeing like how great my employees are doing. I'm seeing the merit of some of this stuff. And, we're talking about, old white men changing succession plans for their companies because of the people they're bringing in. Like that stuff is really powerful. And those stories aren't
Yeah.
shared enough. And I think for those that are true critics, I'm going to assume that they're not fully aware of all the good that these programs have done. I will say I'm being very biased, and this is another reminder of how this is not legal advice, right? Like when I'm
Right.
in these advising meetings, I have to take the interests of my client and kind of work through that. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say, if in personal capacities, if I'm a client ever asks me my personal opinion, this is what I share with them. I try to show them the beauty of it, the value of it, and in my opinion, the inevitability.
Also, you mean to tell me, like, for those of you that are still in the office, you don't want some pupusas at your company potluck? Like, you don't want some elote, something crazy good like that? You haven't lived until you've had a diverse potluck.
Oh
So, y'all,
man,
get them in the office.
you're getting
Okay.
me excited now, and I think there's a whole nother world of like once we get the programs in place, we have to teach people how to interact with each other in the office, and that's a whole nother
Yes.
category of advising, right? Like stop the microaggressions. The kitchen doesn't stink just because somebody heated up ethnic food, right? Like that's not how this works. But I now view it as a privilege to advise on those issues because those are good problems to have, right? Like
Yeah.
you have such a diverse workplace that people now need to learn how to interact with people. Like that's a privilege. That's a good thing. And we
Mm-hmm.
can navigate that. Unfortunately, now that the battle is currently on how to make those workplaces happen.
Well, that is all super helpful, super insightful. Thank you so much for taking time out of putting the boys down and being here with them. We super appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Big fan. Long-time listener, second-time caller, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate all that you guys do. I mean, even in different areas of my life, I'm hearing people that are curious about this kind of stuff, and I'm always excited to say, "Oh, you should go listen to both." And as you're navigating your racial identity development in this crazy world, there's other people that are doing it too. So you guys are doing a great service to the public. And
Thank you so much, Will. We appreciate it. Listeners, I hope you found that helpful. Now you know what it feels like to be me when I'm hanging out with Beth and Will. You have to surround yourself with people who are way smarter than you because that's how you live your best life. That's
That's
what I
not
do.
true, Leila. You were brilliant. Um,
But thank you.
but I think one of the biggest takeaways from talking with Will, who actually gets to interact with these companies, who's actually literally at his computer writing some of the policies for them, is that a lot of these companies are being manipulated by their wallets. And, it is a trolley problem. And they're trying to figure out, like, as a business, we have to either as a nonprofit, like, break even, or as a for profit, we have to have profit in order to maintain, take care of our people, or continue our mission. And that's such a rock and a hard place to be.
It is for a lot of companies. It's not for places like Target, Walmart, or Amazon, though. All have rolled back their DEI policies in the past year. So
Mhm.
I am privileged enough to come from a place of choosing where my dollar goes. My dollar is hard earned. So anybody that said it with their chest that we're rolling back DEI, I do not support anymore. Target especially because they pledged to invest over $2 billion with Black-owned businesses by the end of 2025. And they
Mhm.
wanted to add more than 500 Black-owned brands into to give them exposure on their shelves. And they
Mhm.
ripped that back. So
Yep.
I don't believe Target's doing it on the DL, so Target doesn't see me anymore. And listeners, those are based off of your lifestyle, what you have going on. Those are choices that you can make, and that is something we are going to include in our show notes of companies that have continued their DEI programs publicly or have said we will keep these on, have had votes in shareholder meetings where the majority of them have voted to keep it. I think it's worth taking the time to figure out what those companies are and spending your money wisely. Because why spend somewhere where they don't want you?
Yeah. If you have that freedom, that privilege, that availability to drive, to use that extra gas, go that extra mile, to have that extra time, to look these things up or go to these places, then you're more than welcome to participate in that way. But we recognize that's not everyone's privilege. But what I think everyone can always do is have conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Will slipped in a Walt Whitman quote, be curious, not judgmental. And we hope that that's your main takeaway from this podcast is like, be curious about other people, ask questions, engage with them in hard topics. And when you're not judgmental is when the most productive conversation happens and the most learning happens. And one of our privileges as mixed majority culture and minority culture, like mixed people, as Leila and I are, is like, we see ourselves as bridge builders. And so like, as white passing, I am really approachable. So when people complain about the smell in the kitchen, it's really easy for me to be the first person where they complain to because they think I'm a friendly face. And I'm like, wait a minute, actually, that's my lunch.
That's just curry. That's all that is.
Just made some curry chicken last night. Calm down.
I did
Turmeric is
make.
our friend.
I made some satay chicken last night. That was really good. It was super
We
good.
had we had salmon onigiri, and I made it like a bunch of different ways. We had onigiri for our youngest. I put some inside maki roll with some avocado for our oldest. Will and I had sushi bake bowls. It was delicious. But like he'll take that to work and people will be like, "Oh, did your wife make that for you?" He's like, "Yeah, she did. It's delicious."
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, listeners, like having those conversations, being those bridge builders, I think is most important, and that's free.
Yeah. And as the good book says, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So for those of you that maybe feel a little bit more like me sometimes, just a little bit more spicy towards everything that's going on, just because DEI is getting rolled back doesn't mean you can't live it out in your own lives. It doesn't mean you
Mm-hmm.
can't advocate for it like at work. One of the big things
Mm-hmm.
I love trying to get is rolling PTO days. 3 PTO days you can use however you want for whatever holiday you want. You want to use it for Eid, for Juneteenth, whatever, that's something you can push forward or at least advocate for. So if there are things like that in your workplace or even in your friend groups, diversify your friend groups, please.
Yeah.
If you look around and you're in a monoracial friend group, cut it out is what I would say. But
don't cut it out. Add to it. Add some flavor. Add some spice.
Yes. So, everyone take your time, think about it, comment on the podcast. Let us know if you're going to make any change or if you have any ideas on how you can continue to push for diversity, equity, and inclusion to your fellow human beings. I was going to say fellow Americans, but extend it past that. Fellow human beings, because I think it is worth it to be considerate and kind. And just make everyone feel like they belong, because that's all we really want at the end of the day. People just want to belong. So wouldn't it be great if you did something to advance that for them? I think so.
I think so too. As always, feel free to like and subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review. You can follow us on Instagram at @wearebothand. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify. But until next time.
Until next time.